What is going on, everyone? I am your girl InAVeeCoop. We are about to get into Jordan Peterson opening up about transgenderism. Let's check it out.
No, I actually have a relatively feminine personality structure because I'm pretty high in negative emotion and I'm pretty high in agreeableness. And that's the typical feminine structure. And that's an interesting discussion to have too, because, you know, we have this idea in our culture that you can be a woman born in a man's body. And that's not true. But you can definitely be a man with a feminine personality structure. Like 10% of men are as feminine in their personality as the average woman is. And vice versa. 10% of women are as masculine in their personality as the average man is. Now, you can move those boundaries around and say, well, it's 5% and 40 or something. It doesn't matter. But the point is, there's plenty of men who are as feminine in their personality as the average woman. That doesn't mean they're in the wrong body. It just means that men and women are more alike than different, even though they are different, and that there's huge range within both genders. And we need to know that. Right now, if you look at teenagers, for example, who want to switch genders, 95% of them are unbearably confused. That's what's causing that. And I think there's other reasons too. I think this is...
Y'all gotta look at this. He says, I think, right now. You feel me? Pick up on that.
Is a conjecture. When the trans teenagers came after me when I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada on compelled speech grounds, I spent quite a bit of time watching them. I already kind of knew about that fluid identity crowd. So when I was at Harvard, piercing and tattooing started to become a cultural rage. And I was interested in, well, who's doing this? Because I knew it was a practice that was limited to criminal subtypes and outcasts for a long time. So, for example, if you worked in the circus, you were likely to be tattooed. You know, and you toured around the circus, and that was a kind of carny life, and it was an outsider life. And if you were a prisoner, same thing. But then all of a sudden it started to make its inroads into the popular culture. So we studied a group of early adopters of tattooing and piercing from the perspective of personality. Like, who are these people? And they were all highly creative people. Well, and creativity is a trait. And all people who aren't creative, that's wrong. In fact, most people aren't creative at all. And I can explain that later, but they're not. We developed a scale called the Creative Achievement.
I would love to hear more about that. How most people aren't creative at all. I would love to hear more about that.
Questionnaire, which assesses lifetime contribution to 13 different creative domains. And that your scores would range from 0, I have no training or talent in this area, to, I think it was 8. I'm an internationally recognized expert in this area, right? And so 70% of people, if you sum their scores across all 13 domains, scored 0. And I ask audiences, like, how many portraits have you painted? 0. How many songs have you composed? 0. How many plays have you written? 0. How many recipes have you invented?
Let me stop you.
So the tattooed types are high. They were high in creativity.
Okay.
And a lot of these people who are fluid in their identity are actually high in trait openness. And they do have fluid identities. And some of them are feminine men and masculine women. So, yeah, but that doesn't mean that surgery is the cure for that. It does not mean that. I knew a kid in Toronto who was on the autistic spectrum, and
Bro, that sounds like him and Boosie on the same page, bro.
a lot of the people who are manifesting serious issues with gender identity are on the autistic spectrum.
This is like Abigail Schreier's work and rapid onset gender dysphoria amongst women.
Yeah, well, that's a different thing, the rapid onset. That's more like, so part of the reason I objected to Bill C-16 to begin with was because I knew full well as a clinician that as soon as we messed with fundamental sex categories and changed the terminology, we would fatally confuse thousands of young girls. I knew that because I knew the literature on psychological contagion. And it stretches back like 500 years, that literature, 300 years. It's all outlined in a book by Henri Ellenberger called History of, what's the name of the book? History of Psychoanalytic Ideas. It doesn't matter. It's Henri Ellenberger, and it's his main work if you want to look it up. And so psychological contagions are very common. And so one of them, for example, was the satanic ritual abuse accusations that emerged in daycares in the 1980s. And that was a consequence of women going into the workforce en masse, leaving their children with strangers and starting to have pathological fantasies about it, especially if they were borderline schizophrenic. And those fantasies propagated into the population. Okay, so you see people with blue hair, the blue-haired crowd.
That right there just, ugh, that made me feel super weird.
Well, they're the same people that were doing tattooing and piercing, and they often are literally the same people because they have piercings. It's like, well, they have mutable identities. They're not stable in their identities. They're creative. Creative people by definition aren't stable in their identities. That's what makes them creative. Now, the downside of that is creativity is a high risk, high return strategy. Your new idea is probably stupid and wrong, and maybe it's fatal. But now and then it's unbelievably successful. And also, now and then, our culture would die without it. So we always have this problem because we have to maintain stability, because otherwise everything degenerates into chaos. But mere stability won't work because the future's different from the past. Like technically different in a non-deterministic way. It's actually different. And so then we have to figure out, well, how do we modify our memories or our traditions at a rate that enables us to keep up with the culture? And the answer to this is, in part, we let creative people play multiple games on the fringe, and some of them are radically successful, and then we copy them. I also think, by the way,
and a lot of stuff he's speaking is scientific too. That's what I'm picking up.
That part of what we're seeing in late adolescence, with this insistence on the primacy of felt identity, is the reemergence of suppressed fantasy play that should have taken place at between, say, 3 and 5. That's been suppressed by the imposition of technological artifacts like television and phones, and by the absence of free play among children who are hyper-supervised.
So the fantasy play is imperative to develop your identity by trying out a bunch of different patterns of behavior and ways to be.
Yes, so when my son, when my son was about 2, his sister was about 3 and had a little gaggle of friends, and they used to dress him up like a fairy princess. And this didn't happen for like years. It happened for a couple of weeks, and he was playing along. And I went down there, and I'm a Northern Albertan, and so the gender roles there were fairly finely defined. And I was watching it.
I really want to know how that moment went. Is he really about to tell the truth of how that moment went?
So I thought, is it really a good thing that he's like got wings on, a little fairy hat and a wand and a dress? Is that okay? And I talked to Tammy about it. I said, the girls are dressing Julian up like a princess. And it kind of, I have qualms about it, but I'm not sure what to do, because he was having a good time and he was playing with the girls, and I only had qualms for like about 2 hours. I went and thought about it. I thought, okay, what's going on here? Well, he's playing with the girls. Okay, should he play with girls? Yes, definitely. He should play with girls. Absolutely. Adult males should play with women. Like, we should be able to play with people of the opposite sex.
Right.
Like, so he's learning to play with the girls. Good. Is he enjoying it? Yes. Are they bullying him? No. Are the girls enjoying it? Yes. That's all good. Okay, so what does it mean he's playing at being a girl? Oh, he's trying to understand what it means to be a girl. Well, how do you understand that when you're 3? Or maybe when you're 50, you play at it.
This man got me jaw-dropping in this thing.
Which means you allow that pattern of being to inhabit you, and you experiment with it. Now, a lot of older transgender types, the late onset types, they're playing. They just don't know it. Now, there are often people who have a kind of a rigid identity, and part of their escape from that rigid identity is to develop some of the characteristics that are typical of the opposite sex. They need it. Yeah, well, they derive sexual pleasure. They get turned on by seeing themselves in the clothes of women,
yes,
or feeling it.
Yes.
But I think the the sexual instinct is directing them towards personality expansion. I look at it in Jungian terms. So part of the process of personality expansion in the deep psychoanalytic sense is first you're a persona, or first you're nothing. Then you develop a persona, which is a way of presenting yourself in a socially acceptable way to the world. And maybe you confuse yourself with your persona. Now, you've had conversations with people on your podcast who are stiff and you can't get a dynamic conversation going. That's because they're acting out their persona. You're not really talking to them. You're talking to an act that they've constructed. It's a puppet. An act that they've constructed to make themselves socially acceptable to the world. It can be anxiety too, but then often under anxious conditions, people will revert to their persona because it's a well-rehearsed set of routines,
Right.
and that they know is socially acceptable. Okay, so for the Jungians, the first step outside the persona
Jungians
was the
meaning
shadow.
Carl Jung.
Jung, followers of Carl
Okay.
Jung, or students of better terminology, was discovery of the shadow. Oh, I thought I was the good person here, but it turns out that I've got like some darkness. And you often see this with, imagine you have hyper-compassionate people who are dependent and they won't engage in conflict, so they're always oppressed. And so then when you talk to them, you find out they're really, really resentful, and they have a lot of fantasies of revenge, like a lot. And so then you work with them and you think, okay, you have something to say and do here. You've got some harsh words to say, maybe to your partner. You've got some things to say to your boss. You got to spine up and say it. And that's part of incorporating that, especially aggression. So agreeable people, compassionate people don't like aggression. But like, that's like not liking sex. It's dangerous. But it's necessary. And so you want to integrate it. And if you don't, it has its own life. You know, you see people all the time who, they're so nice. You can't.
I don't know, like, if I agree with that part.
You got to spine up and say it. And that's part of incorporating that, especially aggression. So agreeable people, compassionate people don't like aggression. But like, that's like not liking sex. It's dangerous. But it's necessary. And so you want to integrate it. And if you don't, it has its own life. You know, you see people all the time who, they're so nice. You can't even be in the same room with them. They're that nice. But they're resentful and passive aggressive. They take it out in all sorts of ways, partly because they're always unhappy. They're often moralistically judgmental because they're not saying what they have to say. They got to integrate that shadow. So that was part of it. And the shadow consists of.
Okay, he brought it home. Ooh.
In part, all the things about you that you've deemed morally unacceptable and failed to develop. And so sometimes that's aggression, often. Sometimes it's sexuality, often. And so it'll manifest itself in impulsive, aggressive sexuality, say under conditions of alcohol intoxication, when it leaks out. I'll finish one thought because we were talking about transsexualism.
Yeah.
So the second stage of development in the Jungian sense is the integration of countersexual possibilities. I would say that part of the compulsion between adult onset transsexuality of the autogynephilic type is a consequence of the sexual instinct manifesting itself as a guide to the integration of personality across the sex divide.
I'm sure you're familiar with Douglas Murray's work.
Yes, and Murray, who's very funny, who I like very much, and who's one of the most courageous people I've ever met.
Yeah, he's brilliant. And he had an amazing point about civilizations collapsing, and that when they start collapsing, they become obsessed with gender. And he was saying that you could trace it back to the ancient Romans, the Greeks.
Yeah, Camille Paglia has made much of that.
Yeah,
I think probably it's not so much an obsession with gender; it's a disintegration of categories as a precursor. Like, so it's a marker for if categories dissolve, especially fundamental ones, the culture is dissolving because the culture is a structure of category.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is.
Mm. Okay then. Mr. Jordan Peterson. I am your girl InAVeeCoop, Don Peterson of InAVeeCoop to be exact. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, man. Below, I want you to type I don't get it, but I get it. Or I don't get it, but I get it. Or just type what you get from it below if you made it here. All right. Till next time, thank you for joining. Hope to see you at Coop Troop Live every single day, 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time Zone. All right, except Sunday. Till next time.